Jennifer Hambrick. Good afternoon. I chose to focus on some of today's writing about classical music. To that end, I've selected readings by one of today's most prominent classical music writers, by a classical concert pianist who is also an avid blogger, and by some of today's devoted opera fans and Twitter enthusiasts. And I'll get to those at the end. First on my list is a reading from a story by Alex Ross, the music critic for the New Yorker, about music in China today. And actually, I should say that story and others by Ross that have been published in the New Yorker and also other magazines came out, I don't know, maybe like a year or two ago in this book. Listen to this. It's basically essays by Alex Ross, whose first book is The Rest is Noise. Great writer on music. This story that I'm going to be reading from today actually appeared in the New Yorker in July 2008 after Ross had gone to China and explored the musical culture there. It's a fascinating story about the tensions that keep musical expression, whether in the form of Western concert music, traditional Chinese music, or music in Chinese academia, in a sort of suspended animation in Communist China. In this passage that I'll read, Ross meets at a dinner party the Chinese composer Guo Wenjing, who was one of the generation of Chinese composers who came of age and who came to prominence immediately after the death of Mao Zedong and the political demise of Madame Mao in the late 1970s. Tian and Liao also invited Guo Wenjing, who of the composers of the 1978 generation is the one least known in the West, principally because he never studied abroad. In some ways, he is the most interesting of all because he has achieved a substantial degree of independence within the sometimes stifling atmosphere of Chinese music. There is a whiff of danger in his work. At the core of Guo's work is an encyclopedic knowledge of Chinese traditional music. In the 1980s, he collected folk songs in the mountains around the upper Yangtze River. His hero was Bela Bartok, who showed how a composer could immerse himself in folk materials while retaining a potent individual personality. Guo was also drawn to Dmitri Shostakovich, the master of the Soviet symphony. Guo's mature works, with their martial rhythms, flashes of biting wit, and explosive climaxes, have much in common with Shostakovich's, even if the musical material is drastically different. The eternally ambiguous Shostakovich might also have been a model for Guo while he traversed treacherous political terrain, although there are official pieces in Guo's catalog, such as an overture celebrating the reabsorption of Hong Kong into China. He has also set to music the poetry of Ji Chuan, a bold and enigmatic writer who had ties to the 1989 student protests. For a time, Guo chaired the composition department at the Central Conservatory. He stepped down because he said curtly, "I didn't like it. I'm not good at multitasking." A few nights before, I had heard a choral symphony by Tang Jiangping, the conservatory's current composition chair. With the help of members of the Inner Mongolian Song and Dance Ensemble, the symphony told of the life and times of Genghis Khan. It strongly resembled the pseudo-folkloristic pieces that Soviet composers dutifully produced in honor of non-Russian nationalities. This is the kind of assignment that Guo is now generally able to avoid. He still teaches, although he is discouraged by the tendency among younger Chinese composers to copy European trends in order to establish their academic bona fides. And this is a quote, Guo is saying this. "Say there is a young composer who writes in the style of one of Jiang Qing's revolutionary operas," he said. "Today, others would criticize him because he does not sound like Luciano Berio. But I would say, look, he had the guts to do something that everyone criticizes him for. There must be something good about him." In fact, Guo is carrying on with greater subtlety a musical idea that dominated the revolutionary years, melding Western technique with Chinese tradition. Theater pieces such as Wolf Cub Village and Poet Li Bai, and symphonic pieces like Chu Pang Shan, I guess translated here, a sorrowful, desolate mountain, and suspended ancient coffins on the cliffs in Sichuan, confront listeners with gritty, grinding sonorities, battering assaults of percussion, exuberant bashings and roarings of gongs, and, in the operas extreme vocal techniques representing extreme psychological states. If Woe strays at times on the wrong side of the divide between ritual grandeur and monotony, he invariably has a strong impact. Some lines from poet Li Bai, which chronicles one of the great free spirits of Taoism, seem to sum him up. Wild and free, like my poetry, would I stoop before men of power and deny myself a pleasant hour. At brunch, Guo was in a sunny mood, but at one point I managed to annoy him. Speaking of the music of Chen Qi Gang, I said that it is refined, I said that its refined, free-floating timbres suggested an affinity between modern Chinese composition and the sound world of Debussy and Messiaen. Guo swept his arms wide, nearly upsetting the tableware, and proclaimed, "This view shows that foreigners don't understand China. Music here has nothing to do with France. Opposite direction, different taste." Then he smiled, his argument made. He held up two stubby fingers in the air, as if about to give a blessing. "I am anti-fashion," he said. "I look down on the trend. I want to escape the whole question of sounding like the West or sounding like the East. Non-European composers always have to have their cultural identity, their symbols. In Germany or France, they have real freedom. They absolutely have the freedom to write what they want. Of course," his eyes lit up, "if they are so free, why do they end up sounding the same?"